They say hell has no fury like a woman scorned. They have clearly never met a mother who discovered her daughter's medical fund was drained to finance a mistress. When the hollow beep of the ventilator echoed through that freezing hospital room at 2 in the morning, I swore I would not shed one single tear. I do not want apologies. I want absolute destruction. This is not about forgiveness. It is an execution carried out in broad daylight. Hello to the wonderful audience of Maya Revenge Stories. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Recently, YouTube disabled monetization for our channel, leaving us without a budget to keep operating. If you find today's story engaging, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our staff for their living expenses and continue creating stories for you. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or clicking the link in the description or pinned comment. My name is Riley Cunningham. The shrill ring of the telephone shattered the heavy silence of the hospital room at exactly 2 in the morning. It was a representative from the billing department. The woman on the other end of the line sounded deeply apologetic but uncompromisingly rigid. She informed me that Chloe's intravenous immunoglobulin therapy was being suspended immediately. The medical trust account, the one specifically designated for her life-saving treatments, was completely depleted. There was not a single cent left. I sat alone in the dim, sterile light for 7 hours, listening to the strained, rhythmic breathing of my little girl. At 9 o'clock the next morning, the heavy wooden door swung open. Enter Weston Vance, my ex-husband, and a rapidly rising tech chief executive officer. He stepped into the room smelling of expensive cologne and freshly pressed ambition. He did not arrive alone. A supposedly random journalist, holding a professional camera, lingered just outside the doorframe, catching every angle. Weston marched right up to the nursing station, pulled out a heavy metal black credit card, and authorized the payment for the outstanding balance with a theatrical flourish. It was a negligible amount for a man of his immense net worth, but it purchased him a priceless public relations narrative. He then walked over to Chloe's bedside, leaning down to gently stroke her pale forehead. He played the role of the tormented, devoted father with sickening perfection. Chloe barely registered his touch. Her fragile eyes remained tightly shut, her tiny body utterly exhausted from the brutal, draining side effects of her rare autoimmune disease. I stood motionless in the freezing corner of the room. My arms crossed tightly over my chest. I did not react. I did not scream or tear down his hypocritical facade. I understood exactly what this performance was about. Weston's tech firm was scheduled for its initial public offering in exactly 14 days. He desperately needed the media to paint him as a compassionate family man, a leader with a golden heart, rather than a ruthless narcissist. Just outside in the brightly lit hallway, pacing impatiently in her designer heels, stood Harper Montgomery. She was the mistress who had seamlessly transitioned into the role of the shiny new wife. Harper branded herself as a social media wellness influencer, selling overpriced, fake healing courses to naive followers. Through the glass window, I watched her check her diamond-studded watch, visibly annoyed that her husband was spending more than 15 minutes breathing the hospital air near his sick biological child. When the journalist finally lowered the camera lens, Weston turned to face me. He braced himself, clearly expecting a hysterical outburst. He always thrived on my emotional exhaustion. Instead, I forced my facial muscles to relax. I offered him a weak, incredibly bland smile and bowed my head in a display of utter defeat. "Thank you, Weston," I murmured, my voice intentionally trembling and soft. "We are so grateful." The arrogant, triumphant gleam in his eyes told me everything. He looked at my tired posture and saw a woman who was completely broken. He walked out of that room genuinely believing I was thoroughly subdued, entirely dependent, and completely harmless. The fluorescent lights of Viridian Horizon Biolabs hummed with a low, continuous frequency that usually helped me focus. My office sat at the end of the corridor, isolated and chilled to exactly 68 degrees to protect the server racks humming behind the glass partition. As the lead data analyst for this facility, my entire professional existence revolved around identifying microscopic anomalies within oceans of biological data. I spent my days searching for the tiny, hidden errors in genetic sequencing that cause systems to fail. But today, the data sets glowing across my three curved monitors were not from a laboratory experiment. They were Chloe's insurance denial reports and hospital billing statements. The mathematics simply did not make sense. I cross-referenced the primary insurance codes with the secondary coverage mandates. The primary premiums were completely up to date, but the secondary tier, the safety net that was supposed to cover the exorbitant costs of her specialized immunology treatments, was continuously returning a fatal error code: insufficient funds. I opened a secure browser window and navigated to the private banking portal. Weston and I had legally established the Chloe Vance Medical Trust during the early, aggressively mediated stages of our divorce. It was designed to be an impenetrable financial fortress. We had liquidated joint assets to ensure it contained exactly $3,500,000. That money was legally bound by strict fiduciary covenants, locked away exclusively to guarantee our daughter would never be denied medical care. Because I was still a registered co-administrator, I had every legal right to access the portal. I typed in my credentials, cleared the two-factor authentication on my phone, and waited for the dashboard to load. The screen refreshed. The bold black text at the top of the page displayed the available balance. It read, $18.42. I stopped breathing. The air in the room felt as if it had been suddenly sucked out through the ventilation shafts. My eyes darted across the screen, searching for a glitch, a pending transfer, a banking error. There was no error. I quickly exported the master transaction ledger from the past 24 months and imported it directly into my proprietary data visualization software. The screen exploded into a chaotic web of red outbound arrows. Massive, bleeding withdrawals had been executed systematically over the last year and a half. There were outbound wires of $200,000, followed weeks later by transfers of $150,000. Every single one of these massive deductions was shielded under a vague, heavily manipulated legal categorization labeled as venture medical investment loans. Weston had exploited his executive financial guardianship, utilizing an obscure loophole that allowed the trust to invest in health startups to theoretically multiply the fund's value. My fingers flew across my mechanical keyboard, the rhythmic clacking echoing loudly in the silent office. I became a machine, purely driven by adrenaline and logic. I traced the routing numbers attached to the outgoing wire transfers. The funds did not travel to experimental pediatric oncology labs in Switzerland. They did not go to gene therapy research grants in Boston. Instead, the money was aggressively funneled through a labyrinth of 3 separate offshore shell companies registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. It took me exactly 45 minutes of aggressive digital unmasking to pierce the corporate veils. I ran a cross-reference protocol on the final destination bank accounts. The registered corporate entity holding the funds was a limited liability company named Aura Ascendancy. Aura Ascendancy was Harper's brand. It was the parent company of her sham wellness empire. A wave of profound, absolute revulsion slammed into my chest. I hacked deeper, legally pulling publicly filed vendor registries and cross-referencing the expenditure dates against Harper's very public social media footprint. The puzzle pieces snapped together to form a picture of pure evil. On the exact Tuesday last November, when Chloe was agonizing in the pediatric intensive care unit, gasping for air while her lungs filled with fluid, a transfer of $85,000 was authorized from her trust. That exact amount was used by Aura Ascendancy to charter a private jet to a holistic wellness retreat in the Maldives for Harper and her influencer friends. A withdrawal of $62,000 made in February directly correlated with an invoice for custom designer handbags, criminally written off as promotional marketing materials. The $120,000 drained just last month covered a massive targeted social media billboard campaign in Times Square to promote her ridiculous aura cleansing masterclass. Weston had literally siphoned the lifeblood from his own dying child. He had weaponized his daughter's survival fund, transforming it into a secret, limitless credit line to finance the extravagant, superficial delusions of his mistress. He was buying his new wife's internet fame with his sick child's breathing tubes. My stomach violently rebelled. I grabbed the metal trash can beneath my desk, fully expecting to vomit, but nothing came up. My throat was tight, burning with an intense, suffocating rage that threatened to shatter my sanity. I wanted to scream until my vocal cords snapped. I wanted to drive straight to his glass-walled corporate penthouse, smash through the security doors, and wrap my hands around his perfectly tailored throat. But I gripped the cold mahogany edge of my desk until my knuckles turned completely white. I forced my erratic heart rate to slow down. 1 inhale, 2 exhales. Panic is a luxury a mother fighting for her child's life cannot afford. Hysteria would only give Weston the upper hand. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a high-capacity, military-grade encrypted flash drive. I inserted it into the secure terminal. I did not just save the ledger. I began methodically downloading every single fraudulent invoice, every routed internet protocol address, every fake board approval signature, and every damning digital footprint tying Weston to the embezzlement. I built an inescapable, ironclad vault of evidence. I watched the green progress bar slowly inch toward 100%. With every downloaded megabyte, the weeping, desperate, exhausted mother inside me faded away. In her place, a predator awoke. I was no longer a victim of their cruelty. I was the architect of their impending ruin. Over the next 14 days, Weston maintained his sickening routine. He would visit the hospital for exactly 20 minutes every other afternoon. He always brought a gift, usually a generic, brightly colored plastic toy or a synthetic plush bear that still smelled faintly of the corporate La Schwabe gift shop. It was painfully obvious his executive assistant was purchasing these items in bulk on her way to work. Chloe would offer a weak, polite nod, too exhausted to even unbox them. Meanwhile, my personal phone would vibrate with notifications from Harper's public social media feed. On a Tuesday afternoon, she posted a meticulously edited photograph of herself leaning against the hood of a brand-new, custom-painted luxury sports car. The caption read, "Manifesting abundance and trusting the law of attraction, the universe rewards high vibrational energy. The vehicle cost roughly $350,000. The universe had absolutely nothing to do with it. My daughter's failing immune system had paid for the premium leather seats. I needed access to his inner sanctum, his personal network. I picked up my phone and drafted a text message to Weston, carefully engineering my tone to sound utterly defeated. I invited him to my apartment for dinner on Thursday evening, citing a desperate need to discuss a cheaper, alternative treatment protocol the doctors had suggested. I knew the word cheaper would guarantee his attendance. When the doorbell rang at 7 o'clock, I opened the door wearing an oversized, faded gray sweater. I wore zero makeup and allowed the dark circles under my eyes to dominate my face. I needed to look like a woman who had finally given up fighting. Weston stepped into my modest living room, his tailored Italian suit looking absurdly out of place. He carried an air of magnanimous pity. I served a simple roasted chicken. We sat across from each other at the small wooden dining table. I played the role of the grieving, hopeless mother with absolute precision. I let my voice crack when I spoke about the hospital bills. I stared blankly at my plate. Weston practically glowed with self-satisfaction, offering hollow platitudes about how God only gives the toughest battles to his strongest soldiers. Halfway through the meal, his primary smartphone buzzed. A crisis at the office. He excused himself, stepping into the kitchen and sliding the glass door shut to take the call, but he left his secondary device resting face down on the dining table. It was a sleek, unbranded black phone he always claimed was strictly for secure board communications. I knew better. I moved with the silent, predatory grace of a ghost. I slipped a custom-built, micro-data extraction dongle from my pocket. It was loaded with a sophisticated spyware payload I had coded myself at the laboratory, I plugged it into the charging port of his hidden device. The software bypassed the lock screen in 3 seconds. I did not need to physically look through his applications. The dongle was silently mirroring the entire hard drive, encrypting and transmitting every text, email, and encrypted chat log directly to my secure cloud server. I watched the tiny indicator blink as the progress bar in my mind raced from 0 to 100%. It took exactly 82 seconds. I unplugged the device and slipped it back into my pocket, just as the kitchen door slid open. I reviewed the downloaded data later that night. The contents were worse than I could have ever imagined. It was a digital graveyard of their grotesque entitlement. Among the thousands of messages, one specific text thread between Weston and Harper stood out like a glowing neon sign. Harper had written, "That sick kid of yours is costing way too much money. You need to cut back on the hospital spending right now if you want my venture fund to be large enough to expand the brand to Europe by next spring. Be a man and fix it." Weston's reply was a simple thumbs-up emoji. The memory of his voice earlier that evening echoed in my mind. When he had returned to the dinner table, completely unaware of the digital heist that had just occurred, he had looked around my living room with a thinly veiled expression of disgust. My silence during the meal had convinced him I was entirely broken. He casually leaned forward, rested his elbows on the table, and suggested I move. "Riley, you should seriously consider relocating to a smaller, cheaper apartment in the suburbs," he had said, swirling his glass of water. "We really need to start tightening our belts and saving costs where we can. The medical bills are draining my liquidity." I had simply nodded, staring at the table, swallowing down the bile that rose in my throat. I told him I would look into real estate listings the very next morning. I did not look for a new apartment. Instead, I spent the next 48 hours meticulously analyzing the corporate hierarchy of Weston's technology firm. I needed an insider. I found my perfect weapon in Marcus Thorne, the chief financial officer. Marcus was a brilliant, meticulous accountant who had built the financial infrastructure of the company from the ground up. But recent internal memos I had scraped from Weston's phone revealed that Weston was planning to ruthlessly terminate Marcus just 72 hours before the initial public offering. Weston wanted to replace him with a younger, more compliant executive who would not ask questions about the missing funds. Marcus was currently being sidelined, publicly humiliated in board meetings, and aggressively pushed toward the exit. I arranged a meeting with Marcus at a nondescript, dimly lit coffee shop on the outskirts of the city at 6 a.m. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I slid a thick, unmarked manila folder across the table. It contained printed copies of the offshore wire transfers, the fake venture capital loan approvals, and the damning text messages. Marcus opened the folder. I watched the color completely drain from his face as his eyes scanned the documents. He realized instantly that Weston had not only stolen from a dying child, but had also exposed the entire company to catastrophic federal criminal liability. If the Financial Crimes Division found out, Marcus, as the chief financial officer, would likely take the fall. "He is going to destroy you." "Marcus," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "He is going to fire you, frame you for the discrepancies, and let you rot in federal prison while he rings the opening bell on Wall Street." Marcus slowly closed the folder. His hands were trembling slightly, but his eyes hardened into cold steel. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. "I need the core, encrypted financial ledgers," I replied. "I need the unalterable proof from the mainframe that ties his personal authorization keys to every single fraudulent transfer. You have the access. I have the distribution network. We are going to build a bomb so powerful that there will be absolutely nothing left of him but ash." 3 days later, Dr. Evans, the lead pediatric immunologist, pulled me into the sterile white hallway outside the intensive care unit. Her expression was a complex mixture of cautious optimism and deep, agonizing sorrow. She handed me a thick, glossy clinical brochure. It detailed a revolutionary, experimental gene therapy trial operating out of a highly specialized research facility in Switzerland. This was not just another stopgap measure to temporarily delay the inevitable collapse of my daughter's organs. This was a targeted cellular rewrite. It was a potential, permanent cure. It was the singular, brilliant light at the end of a terrifying, suffocating tunnel. But the financial barrier to entry was absolutely catastrophic. The initial enrollment protocol and the baseline genetic synthesis required an immediate non-refundable deposit of $850,000. We supposedly had that money. It was supposed to be sitting safely in the medical trust, but Weston, acting under the deceptive guise of responsible fiscal management, had recently petitioned the family court to lock the trust under his exclusive, unilateral financial guardianship. He claimed I was too emotionally compromised to manage the assets. He had effectively blocked any withdrawal I might attempt to make without his explicit notarized signature. I was legally and financially paralyzed. I walked out to the hospital parking garage, the damp concrete walls offering a bleak, isolating privacy. I stared at his contact name glowing on my cracked phone screen. Every fiber of my being, every ounce of my self-respect, screamed at me to maintain my dignity. But pride is an entirely worthless currency when your child is rapidly fading away. I pressed call. He answered on the fourth ring. "Riley, I am incredibly busy right now. Make it quick," Weston snapped, his tone thick with irritation. I took a deep, shuddering breath. Completely discarding my ego, I begged him. I explained the clinical trial in excruciating detail, outlining the exact science behind the gene therapy and emphasizing the 85% success rate for pediatric patients. I pleaded with him to simply unlock the trust, to just sign the single disbursement authorization form so our daughter could have a future. "Absolutely not," he replied, his voice entirely devoid of basic human empathy. "That therapy is completely unproven. It is way too risky and, frankly, a massive waste of resources we simply do not have to throw away on a ridiculous medical gamble." As he spoke the deeply offensive words, "waste of resources," the audio from his end of the line entirely betrayed him, behind his callous, calculated rejection. I could hear the distinct, rhythmic, booming cadence of a professional auctioneer echoing in a cavernous, opulent hall. "We have a bid of $400,000 to the gentleman in the back. Do I hear 450,000 for the vintage emerald and diamond collar? Going once, going twice." Then, I heard Harper's unmistakable, shrill giggle followed by her voice urgently whispering, telling him to raise his paddle again. He was literally bidding hundreds of thousands of dollars on a necklace for his mistress at a private jewelry auction while telling me there was no money to save our daughter's life. The sheer audacity of his cruelty left me breathless. He hung up the phone before I could scream. That night brought a darkness I will never be able to forget. Around 11 o'clock, the medical monitors attached to Chloe began to wail with a terrifying urgency. A severe inflammatory crisis hit her fragile nervous system like a freight train. Her tiny body convulsed in absolute, unbearable agony, her pale skin burning with a violent, dangerous fever. The night nurses rushed into the room, rapidly administering heavy doses of intravenous morphine, but the pain was too systemic, too deeply rooted in her collapsing immune system to be easily subdued. I sat on the hard edge of her hospital bed, tightly holding her incredibly frail, trembling hand, my own heart violently tearing into 1,000 jagged pieces. When the brutal wave of pain finally subsided into a dull, exhausting ache around 3 a.m, Chloe slowly opened her bloodshot eyes. She looked up at me, her small chest rising and falling in shallow, incredibly labored breaths. She squeezed my fingers with what little strength she had left. "I am so sorry, Mommy," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the mechanical hiss of the oxygen machine. Tears, hot and fast, finally broke free from my eyes, tracking down my exhausted face. "Sorry for what, my sweet girl?" I asked softly, gently stroking her damp forehead. "I am sorry for being so much trouble. I am sorry I cost so much money and make you cry all the time." That was the exact moment the last remaining shred of my mercy burned away into ash. My little girl was apologizing for the financial burden of her own immense suffering, entirely unaware that her father was bleeding her dry to fund a life of extreme luxury. The sorrow vanished, instantly replaced by a cold, terrifying clarity. I left the hospital just as the sun began to rise, painting the city skyline in bruised shades of purple and red. I did not go to my apartment to sleep. I drove straight to my secure laboratory at the Research Institute. I sat down at my terminal and spent 6 hours compiling the ultimate digital weapon. I took the core encrypted financial ledgers Marcus Thorne had covertly provided me and merged them with the hacked text messages, the offshore wire routing numbers, and the ridiculous luxury invoices from Aura Ascendancy. I built a self-executing, heavily fortified data package. It was a digital guillotine, primed and ready to drop. I sent the encrypted zip file to Marcus via a secure, untraceable proxy server. I attached a single page of highly detailed tactical instructions. We were not going to quietly hand this mountain of evidence over to the local authorities. We were going to hijack the central audiovisual feed at the most critical, highly publicized moment of Weston's entire career. We were going to detonate this financial bomb precisely when he stood on the stage at his massive initial public offering gala. I mapped out the exact timing, the security bypass codes for the luxury hotel's media server, and the precise moment Marcus needed to trigger the remote upload. To ensure absolute success, the trap required complete and utter complacency from the prey. Weston needed to believe I was utterly crushed, devoid of any fighting spirit, and completely resigned to watching our daughter fade away. I picked up my phone, staring at the screen with dead eyes, and composed a final text message to my ex-husband. "You are right. We should accept our fate. I will stop asking." I pressed send. It was the most flawless, calculated lie I had ever told in my entire life. It was the final, soft lullaby designed to sing an arrogant monster to sleep right before the absolute slaughter. The night of the initial public offering gala arrived with a suffocating, intoxicating level of Manhattan extravagance. The grand ballroom of the most luxurious hotel in New York City had been transformed into a temple of corporate worship. 700 of the most influential venture capitalists, hedge fund managers, and prominent technology journalists gathered under the warm, golden glow of massive crystal chandeliers. The air was thick with the scent of imported white roses and expensive champagne. Waiters in pristine white tuxedos glided flawlessly through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with beluga caviar and perfectly chilled oysters. Dozens of high-definition television cameras were positioned on heavy steel tripods around the perimeter of the room, broadcasting the monumental event live to major financial news networks across the globe. Weston stood confidently behind a sleek, transparent acrylic podium at the very center of the elevated main stage. He wore a custom-tailored midnight blue tuxedo that undoubtedly cost more than a standard vehicle. Behind him, a gigantic, 40-foot curved light emitting diode screen displayed his company logo in crisp, glowing silver letters. He leaned into the microphone, flashing his signature, perfectly practiced, million-dollar smile. He was the undisputed king of the world, soaking in the rapt attention of Wall Street elite. Directly in the center of the front row, bathed in the stage lights, sat Harper. She was draped in a skin-tight, scarlet-red designer gown. But what truly caught the light, and what made my stomach violently churn with a cold, calculated rage, was the jewelry resting against her collarbone. It was the vintage emerald and diamond collar. It was the exact piece from the private auction. The stones glittered with an obscene, blinding brilliance. She was wearing $450,000 around her neck. She was wearing the exact cost of the first phase of my daughter's genetic therapy. She was wearing Chloe's life. "We are not just building a technology platform." Weston's voice boomed through the state-of-the-art surround sound speakers, echoing off the gilded ceiling. "We are building a legacy founded on uncompromising corporate ethics. We believe that true innovation must be paired with profound social responsibility." My family is my absolute anchor. Everything I do, every late night in the office, every sacrifice, is dedicated to securing a safe, healthy future for the next generation. That is the fundamental promise of this company: integrity, transparency, and an unwavering commitment to human life. The crowd erupted into a wave of enthusiastic, roaring applause. Investors nodded in deep approval. Flashbulbs popped in a blinding, staccato rhythm. Weston raised his hands gracefully, a humble visionary, accepting his rightful praise. He turned slightly, raising a small wireless remote to click to his next presentation slide, which was supposed to display the projected first-quarter revenue growth charts. He pressed the button. The massive 40-foot screen behind him did not show a revenue chart. Instead, the screen flickered wildly with a harsh burst of static before abruptly cutting completely to black. A heavy, confused silence instantly fell over the massive ballroom. Weston frowned, aggressively tapping the side of his remote, assuming it was a simple technical malfunction. Then, the screen violently flared back to life. It was not his presentation. It was the master financial ledger of the Chloe Vance Medical Trust. The numbers were blown up to massive proportions, glowing in a harsh, unforgiving neon red. The headers clearly displayed the legally protected status of the Pediatric Survival Fund. Right below the headers, the screen began automatically scrolling through the catastrophic outbound wire transfers. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were shown being siphoned out, giant red arrows animated on the screen, visually tracking the stolen money as it bypassed the offshore shell companies and landed directly into the corporate checking account of Aura Ascendancy. A collective, sharp gasp rippled through the audience of 700 people. The journalists, instantly recognizing a catastrophic corporate scandal unfolding live, violently shoved their way to the front, aggressively aiming their heavy camera lenses directly at the glowing numbers. Before Weston could even process the financial data displayed behind him, the screen transitioned again. This time, it displayed the raw, unedited screenshots of his private text messages with Harper. The font was massive, impossible to miss from even the very back of the ballroom. "That sick kid of yours is costing way too much money. You need to cut back on the hospital spending right now if you want my venture fund to be large enough to expand the brand to Europe by next spring. Be a man and fix it." Below Harper's message, Weston's callous thumbs-up emoji sat like a damning, permanent signature. The silence in the room transformed into a chaotic, deafening roar of absolute outrage and disbelief. Investors were shouting, phones were whipped out, recording the massive screen. Harper leaped out of her front row seat, her face completely drained of blood, frantically pulling her hands up to cover her neck, desperately trying to hide the stolen diamonds from the flashing cameras. I stepped out from the heavy black velvet curtains of the stage wings. I moved with the calm, terrifying grace of an executioner ascending the scaffold. I held a spare microphone in my right hand. I did not run. I did not tremble. I walked directly into the center of the blinding stage lights, stopping 10 feet away from Weston. The man was completely frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish, his eyes wide with an absolute primal terror as he finally realized the trap had been sprung. I raised the microphone to my lips. I did not scream. I did not need to. My voice was perfectly clear, razor sharp, and it cut through the chaotic noise of the ballroom like a scythe. "Welcome, ladies and gentlemen," I announced, my words echoing with a terrifyingly calm authority. "Welcome to a corporate empire built entirely on the blood and the stolen life of a dying child." The cameras immediately pivoted toward me. I stared directly into Weston's panicked eyes. "The man standing before you did not build this company with brilliant innovation or ethical business practices," I continued, my voice steady and completely unyielding. "He built it by emptying the medical trust fund of his own terminally ill daughter. The emeralds currently resting on his new wife's neck were purchased with the money required for a pediatric gene therapy trial. You are not investing in a technology visionary. You are investing in a monster who watched his child suffocate so he could buy a private jet." Weston completely snapped. The polished, charismatic chief executive officer vanished, replaced by a desperate, cornered animal, his face twisted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. He dropped his presentation remote and lunged violently across the stage toward me, reaching out with both hands to tear the microphone from my grip. He never made it. Before his fingers could even brush my arm, 3 massive men in dark suits intercepted him. They were the executive hotel security team. I had paid a private visit to the head of security yesterday afternoon. I had legally presented him with a civil injunction and a certified copy of the evidence, calmly explaining that if his men protected Weston tonight, the hotel would be caught aiding and abetting a massive federal felony on live television. The security guards grabbed Weston by his tailored shoulders, brutally slamming him face first onto the polished wooden floor of the stage. Weston screamed, wildly thrashing his legs, entirely stripping away any remaining shred of his dignity in front of the entire financial world. Suddenly, the heavy double mahogany doors at the very back of the grand ballroom burst wide open with a terrifying synchronized crash. The chaos in the room instantly evaporated into a stunned, breathless silence. A team of 20 men and women wearing tactical vests with bold yellow letters across their backs marched purposefully down the center aisle. They were special agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, specifically the elite white-collar Financial Crimes Division. They moved with absolute, terrifying precision, parting the sea of wealthy investors like Moses parting the Red Sea. The lead agent, a tall, imposing man with a silver badge gleaming on his belt, briskly walked up the stage stairs. He completely ignored the flashing cameras. He held a thick stack of legal documents in his left hand. The documents were the exact files I had encrypted and sent the night before. The security guards pulled Weston up to his knees. The federal agent stepped forward, his voice loud, flat, and completely devoid of emotion. "Weston Vance, you are under arrest for first-degree wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and the criminal misappropriation of a protected fiduciary trust," the agent declared, his words ringing out with the absolute crushing weight of justice. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs, ratcheting tightly around Weston's wrists, echoed beautifully through the microphone I was still holding. I stood perfectly still, watching as the federal agents hauled my ex-husband off the stage. I looked down into the audience and locked eyes with Harper. She was surrounded by aggressive reporters, sobbing hysterically, completely trapped in the humiliating nightmare she had proudly bought and paid for. The universe had indeed rewarded her high vibrational energy. It had given her exactly what she deserved: complete and utter annihilation. The initial public offering was dead on arrival. Weston's company dissolved before a single share could be traded on the open market. He was swiftly convicted and is currently serving a 15-year sentence in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud and the embezzlement of a fiduciary trust. Harper's fraudulent wellness empire evaporated overnight. The bankruptcy courts moved with merciless speed, seizing her luxury sports car, her designer handbags, and the diamond and emerald collar. Every single stolen asset was liquidated to fully reimburse the medical trust. She was left entirely destitute, publicly humiliated, and permanently banished from the high society circles she so desperately worshipped. The very next morning after the gala, with the funds safely restored and the legal barriers shattered, I authorized the transfer. Chloe was immediately accepted into the experimental gene therapy protocol. 6 months have passed since that chaotic night. I am currently sitting on a warm wooden bench in the sunlit garden courtyard of Viridian Horizon Biolabs. I am watching my beautiful daughter. Her cheeks are flushed with a healthy, vibrant pink. She is laughing, a bright melodic sound that I thought I would never hear again, as she joyfully runs across the green grass, trying to catch a small yellow butterfly. The Daily Mail was delivered to my office this morning. Among the documents was a cheap, standard-issue envelope stamped by the Federal Correctional Facility. The frantic handwriting on the front belonged to Weston, undoubtedly begging for some microscopic shred of forgiveness. I did not even break the seal. I simply dropped it into the nearest trash can. I stand up, walking over to my little girl. I gently take her warm, energetic hand in mine, and we walked together into the brilliant, golden sunlight. I had proven to the world that it is entirely possible to burn your enemies to the ground, destroying them down to their very roots, without ever losing your absolute elegance. Thank you so very much for listening to my story today. I would love to know, where in the world are you tuning in from? If you found today's story engaging, please help us with just $1 by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the PayPal link in the description or the pinned comment. Your kind support provides our team with the funds to feed their families and empowers us to continue creating even better stories for you. Have a wonderful and blessed day.